Elias Vance had spent 11 months on Lyra 9, learning that loneliness was rarely the most dangerous thing on an empty planet. Sometimes it was the weather. Sometimes it was the six-legged animals that could camouflage themselves as rocks. Once, embarrassingly, it had been a maintenance cabinet whose automatic door had trapped his coat for 20 minutes. His official job was to maintain atmospheric scanners for the Terran Survey Authority, though most days involved cleaning conductive dust from sensors and arguing with Lyra, the station intelligence. "Storm activity increasing in Sector 7, Lyra announced as Elias sat before the observation window, eating something the food synthesizer insisted was beef stew. "Wonderful," he muttered. "Maybe the lightning can cook this properly." "Nutritional analysis indicates your meal is adequately prepared." That sentence is exactly why machines should never open restaurants. Outside, violet clouds rolled across the black mountains, illuminated from within by sheets of blue electrical fire. Lyra 9 had no permanent settlements within 800 kilometers. That was why Elias noticed the light immediately. It appeared above the eastern horizon like a second star, moving far too quickly. He placed his bowl aside and leaned closer to the glass. The object tore through the clouds, trailing molten fragments. "Lyra? Unidentified spacecraft. Severe structural failure. Descent velocity, catastrophic." Elias was already moving toward the equipment room. "Any distress signal?" "Negative." "Registry?" "Unknown." "Chance it lands gently?" There was a short pause. "Would you prefer an encouraging answer?" "No." "Then 0.7%. The spacecraft vanished behind the mountain ridge. Seconds later, the darkness flashed white. A deep vibration passed through the station floor. Elias stared toward the horizon. "That looked expensive." "Your observational abilities remain exceptional." Within 5 minutes, he was inside his armored rover, ignoring Lyra's repeated warnings while the vehicle crawled through a storm powerful enough to make the sky appear fractured. Lightning struck distant crystal formations, causing entire valleys to glow. Twice he considered turning back. Then his scanner detected something near the crash site. Biological signatures. 2 of them. Small. Alive. "Of course," Elias whispered, because apparently tonight was becoming too relaxing. The wreck lay across a field of shattered black stone, its silver hull torn open like paper. Blue flames crawled along sections of metal without producing smoke. Elias recognized none of the technology. Even damaged, the vessel looked generations beyond human engineering. He approached wearing an environmental suit while his wrist scanner struggled to interpret the energy readings. Somewhere inside, something exploded with enough force to make him duck. "I dislike this ship already." He climbed through a broken section of hull and entered a corridor filled with flickering symbols. Gravity changed unpredictably beneath his boots. At the rear of the vessel, he found an emergency chamber sealed behind a translucent barrier. 2 children lay inside. Elias froze. They looked human at first glance, young girls with pale skin and long silver-blonde hair tangled around their faces. But their ears were long and elegant, extending several centimeters beyond anything human. They wore identical dark blue clothing threaded with glowing silver patterns. One girl's hand rested protectively across the other's chest. Elias checked the chamber controls. Nothing responded. His scanner screamed. "Reactor instability detected," Lyra warned through his helmet. "Estimated critical event in 92 seconds. "Yes, I noticed the screaming alarm." "You should evacuate." "There are children in here." "I am aware." Elias pulled a plasma cutter from his belt. "Then stop being sensible." He burned through the emergency hinges while the countdown dropped. 60 seconds, 43, 29. The barrier finally collapsed. Elias lifted one girl under each arm and ran, struggling through corridors that shook violently around him. He reached the rover and threw himself behind the vehicle, just as the wreck erupted in a pillar of blue-white energy. The blast rolled overhead, scattering glowing debris across the valley. For several seconds, Elias lay face down in the dirt, one girl tucked beneath each arm. Then the smaller one stirred. Her grey-blue eyes opened slowly and focused on him. She looked frightened, confused, but very much alive.
"Who are you?"
she whispered through Elias's translator. Elias glanced at the burning wreckage. "At the moment, your extremely underqualified rescue service." Her sister opened her eyes next, saw his unfamiliar human face, and immediately tried to push him away.
"Are you our captor?"
Elias stared at her. "I just carried both of you out of an exploding spacecraft." The girl narrowed her eyes suspiciously.
"That does not answer my question."
Elias sighed. "Wonderful. 2 of you." By morning, Elias had learned 3 things about his unexpected guests. The first was that both girls were recovering remarkably fast. The second was that neither trusted him completely. The third was that one of them had somehow taken apart his food synthesizer before breakfast.
"I was investigating it,"
Nessa explained, sitting cross-legged on the workshop floor while holding a glowing nutrient regulator in both hands.
"You removed 6 components."
7. Elias stared at the open machine. That correction did not improve the situation. Across the room, Lyra stood near the observation window with her arms folded, watching the storm clouds drag themselves over the mountains. She was the more cautious twin, quieter than her sister and constantly alert. Even after Elias had given them clean clothes, warm blankets, and enough food to satisfy a mining crew, she studied every door and camera as though planning 3 escape routes. "When can we transmit?" she asked. Elias slid beneath the synthesizer and reconnected a blue cable. "When the ion storms stop chewing on every signal we send into orbit."
"How long?"
"Could be tomorrow. Could be 3 weeks." Silence followed. Elias looked out from beneath the machine. "That was not the answer you wanted."
"No."
"Good. I was worried my diplomatic skills were improving." Nessa giggled. Lyra did not, although one corner of her mouth moved suspiciously. Elias had tried asking who they were, but the twins offered only their names and the claim that they had been traveling between systems before their ship was attacked. They avoided questions about family, destination, and the insignias woven into their clothing. Elias decided not to push. Frightened children rarely became more cooperative when interrogated. Instead, he gave them simple tasks around the station. Lyra 9 rewarded carelessness with hospitalization, assuming one survived long enough to reach a hospital. He showed them the emergency shelters, environmental controls, medical drones, and the magnetic locks that kept native burrowing creatures from crawling inside during storms. Nessa became fascinated by everything. Lyra pretended not to be fascinated by anything. That afternoon, Elias took them into the vehicle bay, where his old exploration rover rested beneath maintenance lights.
"This is human?"
Nessa asked. "Unfortunately." She walked around it, examining the scratched armor plating. "It looks ancient." "It is 9 years old." "Exactly." Elias placed a hand dramatically over his heart. "Your species has no respect for craftsmanship." Lyra finally laughed, just once, then immediately looked annoyed with herself. The sound surprised Elias more than it should have. Later, the 3 repaired a damaged survey drone together. Elias let the twins operate the micro-welding arms while he supervised. Their coordination was astonishing. Without speaking, they anticipated each other's movements perfectly, passing tools and adjusting power levels in seamless rhythm. "You 2 have done this before." Lyra hesitated. "We were trained. In repair work? In many things." There was something in her tone that ended the question. Elias noticed it but said nothing. That evening the storm intensified. Blue lightning struck the outer ridge repeatedly, shaking the station. Then every light went dark. Emergency strips flickered red along the floor. "Defense grid failure," Mira announced. "External generator offline." Elias was already fastening his environmental jacket. "Of course it is." Lyra stepped forward. "You are going outside?" "Only briefly." "The wind velocity is dangerous." "Yes, but if the grid stays down, the nocturnal wildlife may decide this building looks edible." Nessa looked alarmed.
Is it?
Not technically, but the wildlife here has poor judgment. Before either girl could argue, Elias entered the airlock. The storm hit him like a wall. Through sheets of charged rain, he crawled toward the generator housing, while lightning turned the landscape white around him. Inside the station, Lyra and Nessa watched through the holographic feed. When the storm interference blinded Elias's visor, Lyra found the old topographic sensors and began guiding him.
3 meters left,
her voice came through his helmet.
now forward.
Nessa monitored the generator current.
Power coupling at 12%.
That is terrible, Elias said.
I thought you liked encouraging answers.
Not from children. Working together, they restored the damaged circuit. The defense grid surged back to life, just as shadowy creatures appeared beyond the perimeter, their translucent wings flashing in the electrical storm. Elias returned soaked, exhausted, and slightly smoking from one sleeve. Nessa stared at him.
You smell burned.
That is the traditional human victory scent. Later, after the light stabilized, Elias found both girls sitting on the floor beside his workshop instead of sleeping in their assigned room. Thunder rolled across the mountains. Neither admitted they were frightened. Elias did not embarrass them by asking. He simply sat nearby and began telling them a ridiculous story about an Earth explorer who once got lost because he refused to ask his navigation computer for directions. By the time the storm weakened, Nessa was asleep against his arm, and Lyra had curled beneath a blanket beside her. Elias looked at them for a long moment, then toward the silent communications console across the room. Somewhere beyond the storm, somebody had to be searching for them. By the beginning of the third week, Elias stopped thinking of Lyra and Nessa as temporary guests. They had become part of the station's rhythm, which was impressive considering their preferred rhythm involved touching everything he specifically told them not to touch. Lyra had claimed the observation deck as her private strategy room, although Elias suspected she mostly went there to watch the sunrise over the Black Mountains. Nessa had adopted the workshop and had already renamed 3 of his repair drones. The oldest unit, a dented spherical machine with one faulty stabilizer, was now officially known as Sir Beeps Too Much. That is not its designation, Elias protested. It beeps too much, Nessa replied. The name is accurate. Elias looked at Lyra for support. Do not involve me, she said. I voted for Lord Brokenwheel. Life on Vera 9 remained dangerous, but somehow it no longer felt empty. Elias taught the girls how to navigate using magnetic stars when orbital positioning failed, how to identify carnivorous mirror plants before they closed around a boot, and how to operate the rover's emergency pulse cannon. In return, they taught him a complicated royal strategy game involving holographic fleets and rules apparently designed by someone who disliked happiness. He lost 11 times before realizing Nessa was cheating.
I am adapting tactically, she insisted. You moved 3 ships while I was making tea.
Efficient adaptation. Lyra laughed so hard she nearly dropped the projection table. The change in her was slower than Nessa's, but more noticeable. She no longer watched Elias as though expecting betrayal. Sometimes she even forgot to be formal. The moment Elias understood how deeply that trust had grown came during an afternoon expedition to repair a weather beacon. They were halfway across a basalt valley when Mira warned of movement beneath the surface. Elias stopped immediately. The ground behind them cracked. 3 creatures burst upward, each nearly twice his height, with translucent armored bodies and hooked forelimbs that reflected the sunlight like glass blades. Back to the rover, Elias shouted. Lyra grabbed Nessa's hand. The first creature lunged. Elias fired his plasma tool on overload, striking it across the head, but the second came from his left. He shoved both girls behind a rock formation just as a hooked limb slashed across his side. Pain exploded through him. His suit alarm screamed.
Elias,
Nessa cried.
Stay down!
He fired again, forcing the creature backward, but his knees nearly gave way. Then Lyra did something he had not taught her. She grabbed the rover's remote interface from his belt, activated the pulse cannon, and aimed manually through the wrist display.
Lyra, wait!
The cannon discharged with a thunderous blue flash. The nearest predator was thrown across the valley. Nessa simultaneously triggered the survey drone swarm, sending 6 machines directly at the third creature's sensory organs.
They hate ultrasonic frequencies,
she shouted. Elias stared through the pane.
When did you learn that? Yesterday. Why? I was bored.
Together the twins drove the creatures away. Only when the valley became silent did Lyra drop the controller and run to him. Her hands shook as she pressed medical sealant against his torn suit.
You are bleeding. That usually happens after being stabbed. This is not funny. I disagree. The alternative is screaming.
Nessa knelt beside him, frightened and furious.
You told us not to do reckless things.
Elias managed a weak smile.
Yes, that rule applies mainly to you.
Back at the station, the medical unit sealed the wound while the twins refused to leave the treatment room. Elias woke several hours later to find Nessa asleep beside the bed and Lyra sitting awake, staring at the floor.
You should rest,
he whispered. She looked up. Her eyes were wet.
You could have died. Occupational hazard. You protected us before protecting yourself.
Elias was silent for a moment.
That is what adults are supposed to do.
Lyra studied him, as though the answer confused her more than the attack had. Then she reached out and carefully took his hand.
Thank you, Eli.
Elias froze. She had never called him that before. Across the room, Nessa stirred and mumbled,
Sir Beeps too much needs armor.
Elias closed his eyes. Absolutely not. Lyra smiled through the last of her tears, and for the first time since the crash, the station felt less like a shelter and more like a home. The first sign that everything was about to change came just after dawn, when every inactive screen in Elias's station turned white at the same time. Mira's voice followed a second later. Multiple vessels entering upper atmosphere. Elias sat up from the workshop chair where he had fallen asleep. How multiple? 47 confirmed. Additional contacts obscured by ion interference. He stared at the ceiling. That seems excessive. Lyra and Nessa were already running toward the observation deck. Elias followed them and stopped at the window. Above the mountains, enormous ships were descending through the clouds in perfect formation. Their hulls reflected the violet sunrise like polished silver, each vessel surrounded by blue gravitational distortion. Smaller fighters moved between them in disciplined patterns. Elias had seen military fleets before. This was something else entirely. Nessa pressed both hands against the glass.
They found us.
Her voice trembled. Lyra stood perfectly still beside her, but Elias saw the relief in her face. You know them? He asked. Lyra looked at him, suddenly guilty.
Yes.
Before Elias could ask another question, Mira interrupted. Incoming transmission. Priority classification exceeds known civilian protocols. Put it through. A holographic symbol appeared above the console, a silver crown surrounded by 9 stars. Elias slowly turned toward the twins. Nessa smiled nervously.
We may have forgotten to mention something.
You think? 10 minutes later, the largest vessel settled beyond the station perimeter, displacing enough air to send dust rolling across the valley. A procession descended from its ramp. Armored soldiers carrying energy lances, officers in dark ceremonial uniforms, and finally a woman Elias recognized immediately as their commander, even before anyone bowed. She looked strikingly human, with pale skin, long platinum blonde hair braided behind her shoulders, gray-blue eyes, and elegant long ears emerging through her hair. A silver crown rested above her forehead, connected to a delicate neural interface that glowed faintly at her temples. Her royal armor was graceful rather than bulky, etched with luminous symbols that shifted as she walked. For several seconds, her face remained controlled. Then she saw the twins. Everything changed.
Mother!
Nessa screamed. She ran first. Lyra followed only half a second later. The Queen crossed the distance with none of the dignity Elias expected from someone commanding nearly 50 warships. She dropped to her knees and caught both daughters in her arms. No one spoke. Even the soldiers looked away as Queen Seralyne held them so tightly that Nessa eventually complained she could no longer breathe. Seralyne laughed through tears and loosened her grip.
I thought I had lost you.
We were safe,
Lyra whispered. Then, almost automatically, both girls turned toward Elias. Seralyne noticed. Her gaze settled on him. Elias suddenly became extremely aware that he was wearing grease-stained trousers and a shirt with a burned sleeve. Not exactly formal clothing for meeting interstellar royalty. Seralyne rose and approached him. The royal guard followed. "You are the human who found them?" she asked. Elias nodded. "Elias Vance." "You protected my daughters?" "Mostly. They also protected me occasionally." Nessa immediately announced. "He was stabbed by a glass predator." Elias closed his eyes. "Thank you, Nessa." "And Lyra shot it." "Excellent. Full report." Seralyne's expression shifted between horror and disbelief, while Lyra muttered, "It was tactically necessary." For the next hour, the twins told their mother everything. They described the crash, the storms, the failed communications, the predators, the repair drones, the terrible synthetic stew, and Elias's stories. Nessa demonstrated Sir Beeps too much, as though presenting an honored member of the household. Seralyne listened quietly. The more she heard, the more often her eyes returned to Elias. At last, a royal officer approached and bowed. "Majesty, the flagship is ready. We should depart before the atmospheric interference strengthens." Seralyne nodded. "Prepare my daughters for transport." The words hit Elias harder than expected. Of course they were leaving. That had always been the goal. He crouched in front of the twins and forced a smile. "Looks like your rescue finally arrived." Nessa's expression fell. Lyra stared at him without speaking. Elias tapped the side of Sir Beeps too much. "You two are going home." "And you?" Nessa asked. "I live here, remember?" Lyra's eyes narrowed as though she disliked that answer. Seralyne watched the three of them from several steps away, saying nothing. Elias stood and stepped back while the girls were escorted toward the shuttle. Yet halfway across the landing field, both twins turned around at exactly the same moment, and neither of them took another step. Lyra was the first to move. She turned away from the shuttle ramp, slipped past the startled royal officer beside her, and ran straight back across the landing field. Nessa followed instantly. Elias barely had time to understand what was happening before both girls collided with him and wrapped their arms around his waist. The nearby soldiers froze. One of them actually looked toward Queen Seralyne, as though hoping she had a regulation prepared for this exact situation. She did not. "Girls," Seralyne said carefully, "the ship is waiting." "We know," Lyra replied without letting go of Elias. "Then come." "No." The answer was so simple that the entire landing field seemed to become quieter. Even the engines of the royal shuttle sounded embarrassed. Elias looked down at them. "You two realize your mother brought enough ships to invade a moon, right?" Nessa tightened her grip. "She will not invade you." Elias glanced at Seralyne. "That is reassuring." Seralyne approached, her expression caught somewhere between maternal patience and royal disbelief. "Lyra, Nessa, we are going home." "Eli is coming too," Nessa said. "No one said that." "We did." Lyra finally released Elias and stepped in front of him as if defending him from the Queen herself. "He protected us. He fed us. He taught us how to survive here," Nessa added. "And he forgets vegetables unless someone reminds him." Elias frowned. "I regret teaching you about nutritional responsibility." Seralyne's gaze shifted to him. "Did you encourage this?" "Majesty, Until 30 seconds ago, I thought I was getting my workshop back. Lyra looked offended. You said it was too quiet before us. That was private information. Seralyne almost smiled, but the emotion vanished when she saw the fear behind her daughter's stubbornness. This was not merely childish refusal. For weeks they had lived believing rescue might never come. Elias had become the constant in that uncertainty. Seralyne lowered herself until she was at their eye level. You are safe now. Lyra's voice softened. We were safe with him. The word struck deeper than accusation would have. Seralyne glanced toward Elias again. He could see that she was trying to reconcile two truths. She was their mother, and during the worst weeks of their lives, someone else had been the person standing between them and death. Elias crouched beside the twins. Listen to me. Your mother crossed star systems looking for you. You belong with her. Nessa's eyes filled. But you will be alone. I was alone before. Exactly. Elias sighed. That argument was annoyingly effective. Lyra grabbed his sleeve. Come with us. I cannot just board a royal warship because two small dictators voted on it. We are princesses, Nessa corrected. That is not helping. Seralyne stood. The fleet departs in 20 minutes. Lyra's jaw tightened. Nessa looked ready to cry. Elias gently placed a hand on each of their shoulders. You are getting on that shuttle. Eli. No negotiations. He smiled. Apparently I learned something from living with royalty. After a long silence, Lyra nodded. Nessa did too, reluctantly. They hugged him again before walking toward the ramp. This time they kept moving, although both looked back every few steps. Elias raised a hand until they disappeared inside. The shuttle doors remained open. Seralyne did not board. Instead, she stayed beside him. They trust you, she said. They trust you more. Not in the same way. Elias said nothing. Seralyne watched the station behind him, the repaired drones near the entrance, the tiny helmets hanging beside the rover bay. We will not depart yet. Elias looked at her. I thought you said 20 minutes. I changed my mind. Queens can do that. Frequently. For the first time, there was faint humor in her voice. She turned toward her officers. The fleet remains in orbit until morning. Several commanders looked surprised, but none questioned her. Seralyne faced Elias again. Tonight, I would like to see where my daughters lived. Elias raised an eyebrow. You are asking for a tour of the station? Yes. The kitchen synthesizer is currently under investigation for war crimes. Seralyne's lips curved. Then perhaps we should begin there. Seralyne entered Elias's station, expecting to see the place where her daughters had survived. Instead, she found evidence that they had lived there. Their presence was everywhere. Two small thermal jackets hung beside Elias's heavier coat. A holographic drawing floated above the workshop table, depicting Sir Beeps Too Much, wearing what appeared to be a crown and carrying an energy sword. 3 colored marks had been scratched into the metal wall beside a storage cabinet. What are those? Seralyne asked. Elias followed her gaze. Height measurements. She touched the highest mark with one finger. Beside it, Nessa had written her name in clumsy Terran letters. Seralyne became very still. They asked you to do this? No. Nessa insisted she had grown during the second week. Lyra said that was biologically impossible. The argument lasted 40 minutes. Seralyne looked toward him. Who won? Nobody. I measured them both to restore peace. A small smile appeared on her face, but sadness remained beneath it. Elias noticed and chose not to mention it. They continued through the station while the twins followed several steps behind, pretending they were not listening. Lyra failed especially badly. Every time Elias explained something, she corrected a detail from across the room. That was not our first repair drone, she said when he described the workshop. The first one exploded. Elias glanced at Seralyne. Educational explosion. You told us there was no such thing. I was protecting your emotional development. Nessa whispered loudly. He screamed. I made a controlled vocal response. Seralyne laughed. It was a quiet sound, almost unfamiliar, and both girls looked toward her with surprise. Later, Elias showed her the small helmets he had modified for them. Their original safety gear had been too large, so he had reshaped the inner magnetic padding and installed emergency atmosphere seals. Seralyne turned one helmet slowly in her hands. You made these? The planet has glass predators, electrical storms, acid fog, and plants with boundary issues. I thought helmets were sensible. You could have waited for rescue. Elias leaned against the workbench. They could not. The answer removed the humor from the room. Seralyne lowered the helmet. You nearly died protecting them. Once. Lyra crossed her arms. Twice. Elias looked at her. We agreed the generator incident did not count. You were on fire. Slightly. Seralyne's expression changed. Why? Elias knew what she meant. Why risk his life for children he had never met? He considered giving a clever answer, but none felt appropriate. Because they were scared, he said. Because nobody else was here. That was enough. Seralyne looked at him for a long moment. Most people who discover royal heirs would think first about reward. I did think about reward. Lyra frowned. Elias continued. I was hoping someone would reimburse the synthesizer repairs. Nessa protested from behind them. That machine was already poorly designed. You dismantled it with a spoon. An effective spoon. The laughter that followed was interrupted by a sharp tone from Seralyne's wrist interface. A holographic officer appeared above it. Majesty, forensic analysis of the wreckage is complete. You should see this. A projection filled the room, the destroyed royal craft, reconstructed in translucent layers. A pulsing red mark appeared inside its navigation core. Elias stepped closer. That is not impact damage. The officer nodded. We believe the guidance system was sabotaged before departure. Seralyne's face hardened instantly. By whom? Unknown. Elias studied the energy pattern. Something about it bothered him. He enlarged the image and rotated the hologram. Wait. Seralyne looked at him. What? That pulse sequence. It is disguised as a thermal fault, but the timing is too precise. He accessed his own scanner logs from the crash site and placed them beside the projection. The patterns matched. This was remotely triggered. The officer's expression sharpened. Can you prove that? Probably. Seralyne stepped closer. Then whoever tried to kill my daughters may believe the evidence was destroyed. And now they do not know I copied half the ship's dying systems before it exploded. Elias paused. That suddenly makes my morning considerably worse. Seralyne did not smile this time. You are coming with us. Elias raised an eyebrow. That sounded less like an invitation. It is protection. Royal protection? Yes. Does it usually involve armed guards and no option to refuse? From behind them, Nessa whispered, That sounds like kidnapping. Seralyne closed her eyes briefly. Elias grinned. See? Even the princess agrees. When Seralyne opened her eyes again, the severity had softened. Temporary protection aboard my flagship. You help us identify the saboteur. Afterward, you may leave if you wish. Lyra and Nessa exchanged a look so hopeful that Elias immediately became suspicious. Why do I feel like everyone except me already decided this? Nessa smiled innocently. Because you are learning. By sunrise, the royal fleet was already climbing through Vera 9's violet atmosphere. Elias watched his station shrink beneath the flagship's observation deck until the little cluster of metal buildings became a silver point among black mountains. For 11 months, that station had been his entire world. Leaving it should have felt wrong. Instead, with Lyra and Nessa arguing behind him over which of them deserved the window seat, the silence he had once protected suddenly seemed much less attractive. The evidence recovered from the crashed ship spread rapidly through Seralyne's intelligence network. Elias's scanner records proved that the navigation failure had been triggered remotely through a maintenance command hidden inside the royal vessel's thermal software. The access signature belonged to Lord Vaylor, a senior court official who had publicly supported Seralyne while secretly financing a faction that wanted one of her daughters removed from the succession. He was arrested before the fleet reached the capital, along with 3 conspirators who had apparently assumed exploding a spacecraft was a reliable method of destroying evidence. They underestimated human scavenging habits, Elias said when Seralyne told him. I prefer engineering instincts, she replied. Scavenging habit sounds less expensive. With the immediate threat gone, Elias expected Seralyne's offer of protection to end. Instead, on the final evening before they entered the capital system, she came to his quarters alone. Walk with me, she said. They crossed a corridor whose transparent walls looked directly into space. Thousands of stars burned beyond the hull, while blue streams of gravitational energy moved along the flagship's engines. Seralyne stopped beside an observation platform. My daughters asked me this morning whether you would remain with us. Elias smiled faintly. They asked me the same thing 6 times. Only 6? Nessa was busy. Seralyne's expression softened, then became serious. When they disappeared, I believed my failure was not protecting them strongly enough. But I have begun to understand that protection is not only walls, soldiers, and fleets. Elias said nothing. You gave them something I had forgotten they needed. Ordinary days, mistakes, laughter. Someone who listened without expecting them to behave like heirs. Her long ears lowered slightly, an expression Elias had learned meant vulnerability. I cannot ask them to erase what you became to them. I never intended to replace anyone. I know. That is precisely why I trust you. She activated a small holographic seal between them. Letters formed in Terran Standard beneath the royal crest. Royal Technical Advisor and Guardian to the twin heirs. Elias stared at it. That sounds suspiciously official. It comes with quarters near the family wing, access to royal laboratories, and authority to refuse unreasonable ceremonial clothing. Now you are negotiating seriously. You may still return to Lyra 9 if you wish. Elias looked through the transparent hull at the distant stars. 3 weeks earlier, he would have chosen solitude without hesitation. Solitude was predictable. It did not dismantle synthesizers, steal blankets, rename repair drones, or make him afraid of losing people. That was why he suddenly understood he no longer wanted it. I accept. 2 muffled squeals came from behind a nearby bulkhead. Elias closed his eyes. They are hiding there, aren't they? Seralyne sighed. Very badly. Lyra and Nessa emerged, pretending dignity for approximately half a second before running to him. Nessa wrapped both arms around his waist. Lyra followed more carefully, though she smiled just as brightly. You are staying? She asked. Apparently. Permanently? Do not negotiate beyond the contract. Nessa looked toward her mother. Can Eli eat breakfast with us? Seralyne raised an eyebrow. Sometimes. Every day? Nessa. And dinner? Elias laughed. You realize your mother commands an interstellar kingdom? Yes. And you still interrogate her like this? It works. Weeks later, Elias stood on a balcony of the royal citadel while silver towers rose around him beneath a pale alien sky. His tools occupied a workshop larger than his entire station on Lyra 9. Sir Beeps Too Much had somehow been granted its own charging platform. Lyra trained with navigation simulators beside him, while Nessa attempted to improve a royal food synthesizer despite repeated legal warnings from Elias. Seralyne entered just as something inside the machine sparked. Should I ask? She said. Absolutely not, Elias replied. Nessa appeared from beneath the console. I am improving it. Seralyne looked at Elias. You taught her this. I accept partial responsibility. Lyra laughed, and Seralyne's smile followed. Elias looked at the 3 of them and realized the strange truth of what had happened. He had once believed home was simply the place where nobody expected anything from him. Lyra 9 had taught him otherwise. Home could be noisy, dangerous, ridiculous. It could arrive inside a burning spacecraft and change everything. And when Nessa suddenly asked whether humans traditionally married queens after becoming royal guardians, Elias nearly dropped his tool. Seralyne turned bright red. Lyra covered her face. Nessa looked confused. Elias stared at the ceiling. I survived glass predators for this. Seralyne laughed, and this time Elias laughed with her.